Hi, so good morning everyone who's in the room and who's also online. Welcome to the Family Finance Surveys User Conference 2025. So the UK, my slides aren't moving. So the UK Data Service provides access to one of the largest collections of social and economic data in the UK, and that includes many surveys collecting data on family finances, including the Family Resources Survey, Living Costs and Food Survey, and the Wealth and Assets Survey. And we've been working with the Department for Work and Pensions and the Office for National Statistics to organise the Family Finance Surveys User Conference for a number of years now. And the aim of the conference is to provide an opportunity to bring together those producing the data with those using the data, to hear the latest updates on the surveys and their future developments, and also the latest data analysis and research using the data. Up until 2020, the conference was in person, and it was actually one of our first conferences to move online at the start of the pandemic, and it's actually stayed online since. And one of the reasons it stayed online so long was that it provided a really great opportunity for more people to take part. But we'd had increasing interest in having the opportunity to come together and meet other people working in the area. So this year we have our dual format. So we welcome everyone who's in the room and we welcome everyone who's online. And now, as it's the first time we've done it this way, I'm going to do a little plug already for some feedback at the end of the day. So it would be really great to hear how the conference setup has worked for you. So when we ask for feedback, if you could just spare some minutes to give us that would be really appreciated. And now I just have a quick look at today's programme. So we've got a really great selection of presentations ahead of us. This morning we're going to have our keynote address, which is When I'm 66, How Has the Raising of State Pension Age Affected British Households, with Jonathan Cribb from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. We'll then move on to the Office for National Statistics, who are joining us to present an update on the Survey Recovery Plan, as well as their latest on their surveys and analysis. We'll have a refreshment break midway through the ONS slot at 11:20. And then just before lunch, we will have a research session with two papers looking at data from the FRS on the Scottish child payment and at the impact that it's had. Lunch will be at 12:45. And then this afternoon, we've got updates from the Department for Work and Pensions, a refreshment break, and then a final research paper session where the research papers will cover a variety of topics, including survey response rates, consumption, and wealth inequality. And that's everything this morning. So at this point, I'm now going to pass over to start off our first session. So I'd like to invite Debora Price up to the stage. So she's going to be chair of our first session. So Debora Price is a Professor of Social Gerontology at the University of Manchester and a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. And her research expertise focuses on finances over the life course, especially pensions inequality and poverty in later life. But she's also Deputy Director of the UK Data Service.
Are we there? Thanks very much, Jen, and I'm especially impressed that you memorised the first part of that. So that is, welcome everybody. We're absolutely delighted in the Data Service to welcome everybody to this hybrid conference, and hope you all have a really good day. I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker, who I'm very pleased to say, Jonathan Cribb from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. The Institute of Fiscal Studies is our most important independent economics analytical institute in the UK. It's recognised by the ESRC as a world centre of excellence, and it provides robust independent analysis that I'm sure many of the people in this room and online are very familiar with. Jonathan is an associate director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and he's head of the retirement savings and ageing, holds a very large portfolio in their analysis. He's also the co-principal investigator of the English longitudinal study of aging, a data set that I personally am very familiar with, and without which we would know much less about the later lives of our population. If anyone hasn't had the chance to see the reports on the Institute of Fiscal Studies webpage and the work that they do, I'd urge you all to go and have a look, because there's hardly a field related to family finances that you won't find highly relevant information on. But of course, their role in society is very, very significant. Not only do they provide evidence to government, to policymakers, but they also provide evidence to those whose role it is in a democracy and a civil society to hold governments to account. And that means we can all use their data and analysis with a high degree of confidence. Jonathan has just, he's the director of the Pensions Review, which anyone who's working in pensions can't help but know, published their final recommendations last week, and of course a number of underlying reports. That's going to be hugely important in understanding the future of our pension system. Much of the work that is done by the IFS and by Jonathan focuses on issues of distributional justice and inequalities, and most of Jonathan's research focuses on understanding economic activity in later life, pensions, savings for retirement, and their interactions with public policies. He also leads, I don't know when he has the time, but he also leads the Deaton Review Country Studies project, which examines labour market and income inequalities across 17 European and North American countries. So we're absolutely delighted that he's agreed to come and be our keynote speaker today. For the next 30 minutes or so, I'll hand you over to Jonathan. We'll take Q&A after his paper. We should have 15-20 minutes for Q&A. Please jot down your questions as you go through, and I'll try my very best to toggle between those in the room and those online. So if you're online, please don't be shy to post your questions. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, everyone. It's great to be here because pretty much all my work relies on family finance information and family finance surveys in particular, as Deborah said. While Deborah was speaking, I actually had flashbacks because the first thing I ever did at IFS was something that almost, it must be about a third of people at IFS have done at some point, which is to help clean the family resources survey to help check the HVAI data. Neil smiling there, with whom I worked for a while doing this. So, I think the point I'm trying to make here is getting down and kind of dirty with the data is really, really important, whether you're doing, just a little bit of work or whether you're trying to kind of build a career in research. Okay, I'll tell you about what, let's move on to what I'm actually here to tell you about. Increases in the state pension age are pretty high profile, important policy lever for governments controlling the cost of an aging population. And the UK is not alone in having kind of pulled this lever, but the UK governments have done this to a considerable extent, particularly for women. So back before 2010, state pension ages were 60 and 65, 60 for women, 65 for men. And now they're 66, and we're heading under current legislation to 68. But the case for further increases or policies to accompany those increases depend in part on their economic and social effects. The extent to which they increase employment and whether there are any spillover effects of that higher employment, how this policy changes household income and poverty, and whether there are other important societal changes that respond as a result of this policy change. It's not just the different types of responses that are important, but who is affected and how they respond. And those heterogeneities are important in both understanding why the state pension age has its impacts, and evaluating the consequences and case for further reform. Given this conference, I think it's important for me to tell you about some of the data that I am relying on, which is not just on one paper, but a set of papers that me and my colleagues have been working on for quite a number of years now. And the data that I'm going to draw on today is based on the LFS, the APS, the Family Resources Survey, and ELSA. And I'm going to cite some work that other people have done on a similar, on this reform using Understanding Society. And I think it's important to kind of highlight the value of survey data here, because although there are many great things about administrative data, survey data allow us to understand the range of economic responses that are broader than administrative data in this country allow. Why should we study increases in the state pension age in the UK, and why should I be telling you about it when lots of countries have done this? Austria, Germany, Australia. I could just spend about 2 minutes listing all the countries where this kind of policy has happened. Why is it interesting that we study these in the UK? Now, this might seem an obvious question to perhaps those in the civil service who don't really care about what Austria does. But, you know, as economists, we want to try and make a broader contribution to really work out what the fundamentals, more fundamental contribution than just what is it about your own country. Well, I think there are 4 reasons why we should study increasing state pension ages in the UK. Firstly, it's hard to draw parallels across some countries, many countries actually. Different pension systems are structured in very different ways. That mean the level of the state pension, the incentives that are wrapped up in pension ages are very different across different countries, meaning that just because Australia has had a similar reform to the UK doesn't mean that British individuals are necessarily going to respond in the same way as Australia. There are a wide range of mechanisms why higher state pension ages might lead to, for example, higher employment. And when you have a wide range of mechanisms, some of those, for example, include potential behavioural factors about when you create a label called the state pension age, what does it mean about how people think about their own appropriate point of retirement? And while economic models will often be able to look at 1 or 2 potential mechanisms, understand how people respond to incentives and model those incentives, when you have a wide range of different mechanisms where you don't know ex ante what the most important is, it's harder to do a kind of ex ante analysis to predict what the effects are going to be. And so the kind of ex post analysis that we've done, I think, is really important there. Third, this kind of links to the first point. The UK system has very few incentives to actually retire at the state pension age. A lot of countries, there are very strong financial incentives that if you don't retire at that particular point, you know, the return to continuing to work is very low. But what does that mean is it allows us to think about broader sets of mechanisms that are not just the pure financial incentive. And finally, that we have many data sources. We have many data sources and large reforms that allow us to get down more precisely to understand who's responding and how, rather than having small reforms with small data sets with wide confidence intervals and not knowing, you know, not being able to bring together precisely how people are responding. Throughout, I'm basically using one type of methodology, which is staggered difference in differences. I'm not going to give you an econometrics lecture, but basically we leverage the fact that the state pension age for women used to be 60. It then was increased gradually under the 1995 Pensions Act, and ultimately the increase was accelerated under the 2011 Pensions Act. This is for women, and for men we have a smaller increase. Of course, the men's pension age was 65 until this point, and then goes up. So I will ask you to trust me that about a decade's worth of work has gone into trying to convince ourselves and referees that what we have is robust, and I think it is. And actually the next graph is going to kind of show you why this kind of staggered difference in differences, which exploits this exogenous rollout with people born, women in particular, born a few months later, have this higher state pension age. So I'm going to talk through those effects on employment, then I'm going to talk through effects on household incomes, and come to the kind of other outcomes, health and well-being at the end. So, first, employment. You can do some econometrics, and you can estimate exactly how increasing the state pension age affects employment, or you can just look at this graph. Okay, so what does this show? This takes women aged 59 to 66 by single year of age over the 2000s through up to the early 2020s. And the dotted lines are the points that the state pension age increases for that group. So here, all of the women are over the state pension age, and the state pension age increases to 61, so that by this point, all 60-year-old women are under the state pension age. At this point, all 61-year-old women are over the state pension age, and by this point, all women, 61-year-old women, are under the state pension age. So just looking at these dotted lines, you can see that you have approximately a 10 percentage point increase in employment as the state pension age sequentially affects older age groups. And the fact that we do this difference in differences is basically relying on the fact that in absence of the reform, the employment patterns of these age groups would roughly evolve at the same rate. And as you can see, and you can test this, but basically there are very few differences pre-reform in the age trajectories of employment. So, we have about a 10 percentage point increase in the employment rate of affected women as a result of the increase in state pension age. What do we know about those effects? Well, we know that those effects are entirely concentrated amongst people in paid work in their late 50s. What does that mean? It means that nobody returns to work because they have a higher state pension age. You're out of work in your late 50s, your state pension age is 62 rather than 60, you don't go back to work. What many people do is remain in work for longer if you are still in work, if you still have that labour market attachment in your late 50s. Okay? And this isn't only found in the UK, it's also, that is actually also found in Austria as well. The effects are much higher on people who are credit constrained, people who have low levels of financial wealth, with about 13 percentage point larger increases in employment following the increase in the state pension age for women with low wealth compared to wealthy groups. And we don't find any evidence that is driven by the fact, that you're working longer just because you've got lower wealth. As in, there's a difference here. Credit constraints means you have low wealth, so you need to work longer to finance your consumption. But this is also just a reduction in state pension wealth for everybody, and in particular for people who face higher state pension ages. And we have no evidence that it's driven by that, or driven by basically employers keeping you on until the state pension age and then dismissing you. That doesn't happen in the UK, but it does happen in the Netherlands. But some people with significant liquid wealth still delay their retirement in response to a higher state pension age. It doesn't look like it's due, they're not credit constrained, it doesn't look like it's due to their wealth, it doesn't look like it's due to their employers keeping them on and then dismissing them. We can't exactly say what it is, but there's a potential here for behavioural effects of labelling that the state pension age is at an appropriate point to retire. What are the consequences of these increases in work? There's various potential consequences, but I'm going to show you that on some dimensions, more work in your early 60s can be good for you. I'm not saying it is entirely good for you, but on some dimensions it can be good for you. So this is using ELSA, and the treatment groups here are basically women in their early 60s, and control groups are women in their very late 50s. And you see that as the state pension age goes up, you see increases in employment. These are kind of indexed to their levels in 2010. There's the increase in employment. And we look in a paper published in Labour Economics on cognition and on forms of physical disability, measured by whether you have problems with mobility and indeed measured through your walking speed. And what you see here are increases. Again, we do more complex things than this, but this is just the raw data here. You see rises in cognition relative to the control group, and you see falls in the proportion of people who have mobility problems. This in particular is a very robust result across the literature. Working more keeps essentially your brain more active. There's a kind of use it or lose it hypothesis. So, being in work means you use it more and maintains your cognition for longer. So we do, so in general we think that increases in work for women aged 60 to 63, these increases in work caused by the higher state pension age increase cognition and improve physical disability. Cognition improves in particular for single women, who of course when they're retired have less social interaction than do women in couples because of the home environment. And despite this is where heterogeneity is important, despite the average improvement in this form of disability and increase in walking speed, more work causes falls in working speed for women in sedentary occupations. So if you spend more time in work and sitting on your bottom for a very long period of time, that is likely to reduce your, increase your likelihood of physical disability, reduce your walking speed. So despite the average improvements. So it really matters, of course, and this is a bit of an obvious point, it really matters when you're thinking about the effect of more work on retirement by what you mean by work and what you mean by retirement, because those two things are very different for different types of people. So that's what I have to tell you about work. How about household incomes and the consequences for income poverty? So increases in the state pension age have a variety of effects on household income in different directions. Some things fall. The state pension income falls when you are no longer eligible for it. Thankfully, in the FRS data, it really does drop to pretty much zero. There's very little measurement error there in the state pension income. But you also see small falls in private pension income as people draw their private pension income later. There are moderate rises in employment incomes as a result of those changes in employment that I talked about. And there are small rises in other benefits. This is something we're doing more work on at the moment. Taken together, the increase in the state pension age from 65 to 66, that was the latest increase coming in the late 2010s, for both men and women, reduced net household income by about £108 per week. And these falls are bigger for people out of work in their late 50s, and that makes sense because the set of people who are in work in their late 50s have two things going on. They have less state pension income, but a lot more of them are in work. On the other hand, the people who are out of work in their 50s, they don't have that compensatory income response. The fact that we see actually similar decreases in income across the income distribution, in pounds terms, well, a fall of £100 per week is more important for a poor person than it is for a rich person. So that's immediately a kind of regressive change, but it also means that you bring more people above pretty much any poverty line you want to draw. So we see rises in income poverty. And this is what you can see this here. So what have we got here? Income poverty rate of men over the 2010s. It's just a bit easier to show this one for men. And this is absolute poverty measured after deducting housing costs. This is similar in style to that previous chart on employment, just a bit, just focusing on one change in the state pension age. Men aged 60 to 64 will have a pretty flat level of income poverty, maybe slightly gradually trending up. Similar for these people are always under the state pension age, these people are always over the state pension age, and when 65-year-olds go from being under the state pension age, from over the state pension age here to under the state pension age here, you see a big spike up in income poverty. Interestingly, we've studied this over time. You can both write papers and you can write research grants to say, look, we know what happened last time with the state pension age, but actually you don't know what's going to happen next time as the state pension age gets higher. And indeed, that wasn't just a way to keep the show on the road financially at IFS. There is a genuine difference in how income poverty has responded to more recent changes in the state pension age compared to the earlier ones. We find that increasing the state pension age from 65 to 66 has a larger impact on income poverty than increases from 60 to 62. We estimate an increase of 14 percentage points for 65-year-olds when the state pension age went to 66 compared to 6 percentage points from going 60 to 62. There is, of course, some confidence intervals around those, but these are, economically and statistically different from each other. Why is it that there's such a big difference? Well, there's basically, I'm going to call 2.5 reasons. Okay? One is that the state pension is getting more generous, and that means that when you increase the state pension age, you're taking away more income because it's more generous. Okay? So this is the mean state pension income. I can't remember exactly. This is probably mean state pension income of recently retired people, probably not quite over the whole population. Back in 2010, you had women with state pension incomes of, in real terms, today's terms, about almost 120 pounds per week. But more generous indexation of the state pension and changes to the rules about how you qualify for a state pension mean that women get much higher state pensions now. And all that just means is that, when you don't get it, it's more important for you. And when you do get it, it makes a more transformative effect on your household income than it used to, particularly for women. There is the half reason is that there is not quite as dramatic, but there is also an increasing gap in the means tested support that you get at state pension age. So the gap between basic means tested support through universal credit or previously something like JSA versus pension credit, that gap has widened. Again, the wider that gap, the more important it is whether you're exactly over or under state pension age. The other reason, so having done 1.5 reasons, the other reason is just that many fewer people are in paid work at the points that we're now thinking about increasing the state pension age. So, for people in their early 60s, you increase the state pension age, and a lot of people are still in work at that point, because not everybody retires at state pension age, And so the importance of government benefits, whether that be wealth, means tested or state pension benefits, is less important for people in their early 60s than it is for people in their late 60s. And so, again, if you think about the effects on poverty, it's much more important if you are removing or delaying the point at which you get a state pension for people who are more reliant on state income, which are those later in their 60s than those earlier in their 60s. I'll go to my last section, which is more recent, and indeed I really do draw on other people's work here, and including some of the really valuable data that's collected in Understanding Society. So what do we know about how health and well-being responds to higher state pension ages? Well, to some extent, I've already shown you some of that. Higher work, we think, improves cognition and maintains people's physical capacities to some extent. But there's some evidence of declines in mental health when you increase the state pension age. So this is a summary box from a kind of review I did. And so, what do we got? So, let's look at, I think there's a bit of a division between the top and the bottom here. Here's another paper here that shows that when you put the state pension age up, those mobility problems decline, i.e. there's an improvement, and on self-reported health, Amin, Smith and Crawford find relatively little. But there's much more evidence on mental health that mental health worsens when the state pension age goes up. It's a bit hard, scales of mental health are a bit harder to interpret than, X pounds per week more in income, or X percent more of the population in employment. But the fact I've emboldened these, sorry, I should have had a note here. The fact I've emboldened these means that these are statistically significant changes, and I'm trying to give you a sense here of these are not enormous, but they're kind of moderate declines in mental health. What about well-being? Well, if I was standing a couple of miles away in the Centre for Economic Performance, in front of people like Richard Layard, they'd say something like, well, you want, if you've got lots of different measures, how do you aggregate all the different things that are going on? Well, we should be looking at how well-being changes, and we can use well-being measures to think about effects of policies and the effect of different policies on social welfare. We find that well-being declines when the state pension age rises. So this says that, so effect of being under the SPA, that just means, when the SPA rises, you go from essentially a counterfactual, you would have been over the state pension age, now you're under the state pension age. So increasing the state pension age seems to reduce the well-being of affected women in this case by 0.25 to 0.3 points on a 10-point scale. That is not tiny, but for what it's worth, people at the LSE have done work to show that these kind of well-being changes are not enormous compared to some of the other well-being effects of policies that are focused more in a more means-tested way at people at the bottom of the income distribution, for example. But they're not tiny, and they are more concentrated. Again, these declines in well-being are more concentrated on people who are out of work in their late 50s. So those people who can't. A lot of the narrative about higher state pension age is for people forced to work longer. Oh, I have to work longer. And we do, in a sense, see some evidence of that, right? Because the people who are most likely to be working longer are those who are credit constrained. But what we really find is actually this set of people who find it much harder to respond because they're already out of the labour force. They are the ones who are seeing higher falls in their income, and they're the ones who are seeing worse falls in their well-being as a result of the higher state pension age. So, that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but amazingly for me, I'm on time. Oh, almost fell over with astonishment. So, what do I want to tell you? Increases in the state pension age are important drivers of employment, increases in employment for people in their 60s. We think as a result of the interactions of this with credit constraints and likely behavioural factors, for example, about what is signalling about what an appropriate point to retire is. In some ways, more paid work can be beneficial, but households also experience falling income, rising poverty, falls in well-being, and rises in mental health issues. Well, I think this doesn't mean that we shouldn't increase the state pension age. These need to be balanced against substantial exchequer gain of about £6 billion per year for 1 year increase in the state pension age, and of course, you could, that could, with that 6 billion, you could do other things, and so there is a good case for higher state pension ages over time as hopefully longevity increases. But I think we do need to think carefully against balancing these exchequer gains against the consequences for individuals and indeed households. And indeed, we need to recognise that increasing the state pension age is a much more aggressive policy lever than limiting the indexation of the state pension. We have a paper in the Oxford Review of Economic Policy, which basically compares the distributional impacts of moving from a triple lock state pension to one that grows in line with earnings over time. That basically hits higher income people more because they live longer, whereas increasing the state pension age hits lower income people more because they live less long. So what does that mean for policy? It probably means that what we want to do in terms of adjusting to the costs of an ageing population is not just use state pension increases as a way of controlling the pension costs, but having multiple levers, controlling with the cost with some increase in the state pension age and some limits to indexation rather than just using the state pension age. We, the IFS Pensions Review, also recommended that there should be targeted increases in means-tested benefits in the run-up to state pension age as state pension age rises. That is a more targeted, cheaper way of directing additional financial resources towards poor people who struggle in their mid-60s as the state pension age goes up, rather than, for example, a much more expensive policy, which would be not to increase the state pension age. I think we've got about 20 minutes or so, but anyway, that's me done, and maybe back to Debora now, I guess.